Lipids are a class of hydrocarbon-containing organic compounds. Lipids play diverse and important roles in nutrition and health. Many lipids are absolutely essential for life. Lipids are transported in the bloodstream by lipoproteins, which are an assembly with a lipid at the center and a protein outer coat. Lipoproteins fall into three categories: VLDL, very low density, LDL, low density, and HDL, high density. They are defined by their density, or the amount of protein they contain, as well as their role in the development or prevention of heart disease. Very low-density lipoproteins, or VLDLs, are primarily formed in the liver. VLDLs function to transport triglycerides from the liver to the rest of the cells, including adipocytes, for storage. As the VLDL moves along the bloodstream, the enzyme lipoprotein lipase cleaves the triglyceride from the lipoprotein to be taken up by the cells. When the VLDL loses its triglyceride, the protein content increases, making the lipoprotein more dense. It is now categorized as a low-density lipoprotein, or LDL. LDL is the form of lipoprotein often called bad cholesterol because of its implication in the development of heart disease. It delivers cholesterol to cells with specialized cholesterol receptor sites. HDL, or high-density lipoproteins, are released from the liver to travel throughout the body, picking up cholesterol from dying cells and arterial plaques. The cholesterol is then returned to the liver, where it is used to synthesize bile. This form of lipoprotein is often called the good cholesterol because it reduces plaque buildup in the arteries. While each type of lipoprotein has a function in the body as a transport mechanism, maintaining a balance between LDL and HDL is essential for preventing cardiovascular disease.
Looking at the different types of lipoproteins, here we have the low-density lipoprotein. I always describe the low-density lipoprotein, or LDL, kind of as the kid that just deposits everything. You know, when you get home, you just drop a shoe here and pants there. You're just leaving things all over the place. Well, that's not so great when it comes to your arteries. So they're depositing little bits of cholesterol here, and that can begin to form plaques, which we'll see in a little bit. The HDL, kind of think about as the cleaner, or the mom that comes around and picks up all the shoes and the pants and all the things that have been spilled out and returns it back into the liver. So our LDLs, they deposit cholesterol in our arteries, and that's why they get that name of bad cholesterol, and that's also why they are associated with an increased risk of heart disease. This picture kind of gives you a better look at what a calcified artery would look like. You have the cholesterol here that has made or formed plaques. This has also narrowed the artery, and so blood is restricted as far as how much nutrients and oxygen that it can actually transport. Our HDL is there to help prevent this from happening. It can before it becomes a plaque, can take it from the arteries and circulate back to the liver itself, also known as good cholesterol, and reduces the risk of heart disease. Now, most of the time when we refer to fat, we're talking about adipose tissue, and this is where we store our extra amounts of calories, and we store them as triglycerides. The fat, even though it may be unsightly, it does serve a purpose. It helps to cushion our internal organs, which is why older adults who become very small or thin have a higher risk of things like hip fractures, because they don't have that extra protection. It also helps to insulate our body, so those with a low body fat amount also seem to be colder more often than not. Our adipocytes, or individual fat cells over here, they are very good at making more of themselves. They proliferate, and they can make larger ones of themselves to store more, and they can split to make new ones. They can store almost up to 1,000 times of what their original size is of triglycerides. Now that we've talked about storing triglycerides for later on, our body is going to use that extra storage of energy in different ways. In times of feasting, we're going to have that extra fat being stored from chylomicron VLDLs into our triglycerides within each adipocyte. When we begin to have a deficit, meaning we're not fueling our body enough, our body's going to have to go in there and get those reserves, take them out, break them down into free fatty acids, which can easily provide an immense amount of ATP or energy. Speaking of energy, we have fat being able to provide our bodies with 9 calories per gram, which is over twice the amount of calories from proteins and carbohydrates. This can be used in order to fuel our heart, our liver, and also our oxidative muscles for energy. Having enough fat also allows our body to spare glucose in order to provide our energy for brain and red blood cell production. Here you can see a cell we have inside the cell, kind of a visual of what it looks like in order to convert fatty acids, into eventually ATP. So this fatty acid will enter in 2 at a time, 2 carbons at a time. It creates acetyl-CoA. It can enter into the citric acid cycle, producing a lot of high energy ATP electrons, and then also continue on into the electron transport chain to provide additional, in fact, a large amount of ATP, which we'll see a lot more in Chapter 8. Dietary fat is essential. In fact, if we don't have it, we're not going to be able to absorb those essential fat-soluble vitamins A, D, E, and K. We also need it in order to absorb phytonutrients. Carotenoids is one example of many. And then also we need cholesterol. We know if we don't get enough of it, we're not going to be able to synthesize things like hormones and vitamin D itself. If we don't get at least 20 grams of fat a day, we're not going to be able to transport those fat-soluble vitamins. So 20 grams a day minimum to do this one function here. When it comes to fat, we have recommendations as far as the DRIs, or the dietary reference intakes, and one is given and illustrated here as 20 to 35% of our total kilocalories should be coming from our total amount of energy. So if you have a 2,000 calorie a day diet and we were to do the math, 2,000, and we have 20 to 35% should be coming from that. If we did that and then we converted it to grams, that would equate to 44 to 78 grams a day as far as the recommendation. When it comes to saturated fat, we know that saturated fat can be unheart healthy, and so our fat recommendations is to not exceed 10% of calories from saturated fat sources. Again, if we did 2,000 calories and 10% of that would be 200, we convert it to grams, that's 200 divided by 9, that would equate to 22 grams a day, so not to exceed that. As far as trans fats, we have a recommendation again to less than 1% of our calories should be coming from that because we know that our body really can't do anything beneficial at all from trans fats. A good way to apply this to better understand it is to look at your own dietary analysis within your My Pearson My Diet Analysis reports. If you can see this example, we have Joe Exotic here. It says everything that he's recommended to have throughout the day on this column, and then it shows what he actually consumes in this column. If we look at his calories, it's recommended that he should have somewhere around 2,800 calories a day. If we do the math from that AMDR, his calories from fat should be no higher than 787 calories. That's that 35% of the AMDR is that 787. He did exceed that, and so that's why he has 121%. So that's not something we want. We want that to be no more than 100%. Now coming to saturated fat, if we look at those guidelines, no more than 10% of your calories should be coming from saturated fat, and the recommendations are from that 10%, that would equate to 253 calories from saturated fat, no more than that. He did exceed that, and that's why his percentage here is more than what is recommended. So therefore, if we're looking at a cardiovascular disease risk standpoint here, and let's just say that he does have a high risk, this means that his overall fat intake is way too high compared to the acceptable macronutrient distribution range guidelines, and then also way too much for the recommendations for saturated fat. So he needs to lower that in order to reduce his risk. Ideally, we would come down here to monounsaturated fat and polyunsaturated fat, and we want these guys to be higher. So here's the recommendations here. he's only consuming about 72 to and 50% respectively of mono and polyunsaturated fatty acids. So these would help actually reduce his risk. These, the saturated fat, we want lower. These guys we want higher because these help to produce more HDL cholesterol, the high density lipoproteins. This helps to produce more of the low density lipoproteins. So this really needs to be in reverse when it comes to promoting good heart health. For Joe. I want to remind you about essential fatty acids. We've defined this before, but remember essential comes from the diet. And those omega-6s and omega-3s, I would encourage you to stop here and see if you can draw that yourself. What does that look like when it comes to the methyl end, the omega, and then the acid end as well? But we're looking at those here. We have to get them from our diet, and we know that we need both of them. We tend to get omega-6s, this linoleic acid, a lot easier than we do omega-3s. This has an adequate intake recommendation of 17 grams a day for men, 12 grams a day for women, and then we should be getting around 5 to 10%. Now, I don't need you to memorize this. I just need you to know kind of what this proportion is. We need more omega-6s than omega-3s, but we tend to actually meet this recommendation. We could check this one off. We don't tend to get enough to even meet this very tiny, small recommendation. See, the adequate intake is recommended at 1.6 and 1.1 grams per day for men and women respectively. We're only getting about 0.6, maybe up to 1.2% of our calories from omega-3, so we have some work to do when it comes to this. The American Heart Association recommends actually higher numbers than this adequate intake, 2 to 4 grams a day of omega-3s. If anybody has hypertriglyceridemia, that just means high triglycerides in the blood, and that is a significant risk factor for cardiovascular disease. Sources of omega-3s include fish oils or fatty fish, canola, soy, flax seeds, if you can get the actual omega-3s out of that shell, the chia seeds, and walnuts. It's recommended for Americans to be able to get this to eat or consume 2 servings of fish per week. There is another way to get it, and that's from different fish oils. An example is cod liver oil. Unfortunately, this used to be a very common practice, kind of an old wives' tale to be able to cure all things. But cod liver oil, since it comes from the liver, is also very high in vitamin A, and that can lead to a very dangerous toxicity. So this is no longer recommended as a practice anymore.